And this is obviously a message to the leaders of the church. The Lord Jesus Christ is obviously talking to the Pharisees and the scribes at the time. But let's just go back to Exodus first of all and have a quick look at that. Reading through the lectionary today, reading from Exodus 20, verses 1 to 4, 7 to 9 and 12 to 20. Well, what we see here first of all is that God chose Israel. That's what he's saying here. And because God chose Israel, that was a real privilege for Israel. It was a real privilege to be chosen by God, all the other nations of the earth, and yet God chose Israel. And so there was a great deal of blessing with Israel. And there were obviously revelations for Israel. God gave the Israelites the law. He gave the Jewish people the law. They were to be his people. He was going to be their God, and they were going to be his people. And so he gave them the law, he gave them the covenants, and they became his vineyard. Often spoken of as his vineyard. Obviously this is a long time ago, and people lived very simply, and they understood terms like, farming terms and things like that. So to talk of Israel as being a vineyard, they very, very readily understood what that was like and the amount of work they had to go into a vineyard, and how a farmer would actually love his work, and his vineyard would be the top priority for him, to keep it, to keep it right, and to look after it and nurture it. And so we have this picture with God nurturing Israel. And of course that meant that there were not only privileges, but it also meant that with privilege comes responsibility. And so we see here in Exodus how God then, through Moses, gives them the law. And he says, I'm a jealous God. In verse 5, I'm a jealous God. I'm visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generations of those who hate me. But at the same time, and this is where we see God's heart, at the same time showing mercy to thousands, to those who love me and keep my commandments. And one of the first things that comes out of this for me is the impact of the Sunday blessing for us. Because we're told here, remember the Sabbath day. And unfortunately, I think in this day and age, we have really quite neglected the Sabbath day, because we have become so commercialised, and we've kind of gone along with the crowd so much that Sunday is not so much a day to worship God, but a day to catch up on the things we can't do all week. A day that we tend to use to get the things done that perhaps we didn't get done in those 6 days. And yet God says we should work for those 6 days in the same way that he laboured in creation for 6 days and then rested on the 7th day. And that's effectively what God is saying to us, that the 7th day is the Sabbath of the Lord. Man wasn't made for the Sabbath, but the Sabbath was made for man. But it wasn't just made for man to just use as a distortion, to just use as another day to catch up. It was really given because we need a day of rest. If we're going to work hard in this life, we need a day of rest. But unfortunately, in modern society today, especially in Britain, it's very difficult to rest at any time, because there are so many things that encroach upon our time and come into our intimate moments with people. We have mobile phones, we have all sorts of things that just force their way into our lives almost. And so we need to be reminded of this. remember the Sabbath day. So there's something about remembering it, because it seems pretty obvious that it then becomes like any other day. And the Lord doesn't want us to have it just like any other day. It's supposed to be a day of rest, and also set apart to worship God, to meditate on God, to reflect on God, to spend time with God, to build a relationship with God, to actually come to a point where we begin to know God as God knows us. And obviously God knows everything, so we're never ever going to be able to know God the way he knows us. However, it doesn't mean we stop for the lack of trying. We must remember the Sabbath day. That's what it's talking about. And so it's no longer seen to be a special day. And one of the things that comes through in this whole set of readings today is how God treated Israel as a vineyard, and as he nurtured them, and it gave us responsibilities, and therefore we came along as engrafted branches in that vineyard. We became almost like new plants that came into God's care, that became God's people, that became the holy people of God. And unfortunately in this life we are so stressed out on a daily basis that even Sunday becomes something of a day where even the stresses of that comes in and starts to affect us, even to the point where it says here, "In it you shall do no work, you nor your son nor your daughter nor your male servant nor your female servant nor your cattle nor your stranger who is within your gates." And there is something in that when people visit us from afar, there is this attitude that says, "Oh, well, I won't bother going to church today. I won't bother to, stay in touch with God."